back up here in Johannesburg and at this beautifully revamped auditorium. So really, I think you've done a fantastic job. It was looking quite tatty the last time I was here, so I hope it's not my absence that's made it look better. Probably it is. But for tonight, what a challenge. What a challenge I've been handed. Captain Selwyn Levin, known to everyone as Scully. 55 years of flying, give or take. We're going to condense that into an hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, depends on how long you've got. But it's not just an ordinary 55 years of flying. Otherwise, we wouldn't have Scully here as an EAA flying legend guest, because he really is a true South African flying legend. I doubt that there's anyone involved in aviation who doesn't know of Scully and doesn't know of some of Scully's exploits. We're going to try and unravel a few more if the man will be forthcoming tonight. So let's give Captain Scully Levin a warm EAA welcome. That wave, you've seen it out of a Harvard before, I think. Scully, what does it feel like to be a guest at your own talk show? Because in fact, you started these talk shows to recognize flying legends from South Africa way back, I think, in about 2005.
That is correct. It all stemmed from my great pal, Jeremy Woods, who only used to phone me, and I think still does, if work was involved. So I would say, yes, Jeremy, what do you want me to do? But anyway, this time it was just, he phoned me for ideas. And we discussed this particular idea, and Bob's your aunt. You know, it's been going for about 20 years.
Yeah, it has.
Yeah.
It has, with a few interruptions, but you were one of the, well, you were the first talk show host here, and interviewed various other personalities.
Yeah, 3 or 4 shows, and then
and you were done.
I handed over to the pros.
And Carl did several years, and
Carl and yourself.
Sorry, you're stuck with me now.
Yeah.
So, Scully, it really is an honor to have you here. I spent a couple of hours with Scully this morning, probably more hours than he thought he was going to be spending with me, but I'm a slow learner. And so I'm just going to start by giving you what Scully's told me about himself in terms of his CV. And we're going to talk through a whole lot of this as we go through the evening. So we know that Scully started flying in 1964. Those of you who can do sums, 55 years, 2019, it's quite easy. And he obtained his wings at the end of that year. And when he was in the Air Force, his love for aerobatics is where that started, although I think maybe it started a little bit sooner than that. He's flown a pit special, and he's won 3 South African national aerobatic championships with that. He joined SAA in 1971, and he gave 38.25 years of service to SAA.
That's great, yes.
Yeah. Retired in September 2009, so 10 years ago. And he then joined Mango, and he's flown Mango for another 9 years. So, an enormously long airline career. He started the first civilian formation aerobatic team in South Africa. He developed the J3 truck top landing. He started the radial pair with Harvards. And then he started together with Arnie Mengele, they got together with the Flying Lions. We'll talk about some of that. He's flown some of the iconic airplanes of his era, amongst which is a Spitfire, which will have most people slipping off their seats as they drool. He has flown the biggest airplanes in the world in formation as a display, and he's developed those formations. And he's flown pretty much everything that South African Airways has had in the era that he's been there. In the process, you've amassed some 29 going on 30,000 hours, I believe. and you are not done yet. So with 180 types on your license, which is probably more types than some of us have ours, you have certainly seen it all and done it all. Scully, as I say, welcome. So where do we start with that sort of an introduction? And when I'm stuck, I always say we start at the beginning. So, you told me that this morning you could remember back to the age of 2.
I have flashbacks to the age of 2, yes.
Okay.
And what I remember was that my dad was ex-RAF. He had this tunic hanging up in one of the bedrooms with his medals and his wings and the flashes over here saying South Africa. But I only came across that when I was about age 4. What I remember from age 2 was that we had an airspeed Oxford in our front garden. Petersburg was the multi-engine training base for the South African Air Force, part of the Empire Training Pilot scheme for World War II. And at the end of World War II, they cut these Oxfords up. They just cut the wings off outside of the engines and they sold these things off to scrap metal merchants. My dad bought one, and then he had a little Austin motor car. He drove out to the airport, opened the boot, and he strapped the tail wheel, put the tail into the boot of the Austin, roped it down and towed it home through the main street of Petersburg, and then dumped it in my granny's garden. And that became my playpen. I never had a sandpit as a kid. I had an airspeed Oxford. And I had these flashbacks from age 2 of my dad plonking me down in a seat and going through all the checks and saying, this is how you fly the aeroplane. And after that, around about the age of 3 or 4, I became aware of this tunic that hung up in the cupboard, and also some of you might remember Kellogg's cornflakes at that time. On the back end of the boxes, they had cut out aeroplanes. Or you could press them out or cut them out by scissors. You could weight them with a paper clip and you could fly them. And my dad used to make these for me. I used to fly them around the house. But what he used to do is he used to sit me down and say, this is an aileron, this is an elevator, this is a rudder, wada. And I was learning about the theory of flight from the age of 4. It's little wonder that I ended up as a pilot. I even had a tree outside that I knocked nails into, and I used to sit up there, and they were my engine controls, and I used to fly my tree, you know. Well, like you smoke your socks, I used to fly my tree.
So that was a grand start to life as a pilot and a career start. But your father also flew airplanes, didn't he?
Yeah. My dad flew through, he flew 2 years against the Japanese in Burma, and they flew the hump with the Americans, and after his 2 years there, he went to England, and that's where they went into secret training, very, very secretive, at the time, those guys, for the crossing of the D-Day invasion and then the crossing of the Rhine. So then they practiced towing gliders and dropping paratroopers, etc., etc.
So that was just part of the genetic makeup.
I guess it was. Before my dad, there was a great uncle that was in the Royal Flying Corps that flew Sopwith Camels. Then there was my dad, then me, and now Ellis and Sally, and I don't know who's going to be next.
Well, you mentioned the Royal Flying Corps. My great-grandfather was in the Royal Flying Corps, but the war ended before he got to fly, so he didn't have any experience that he could pass on through the genes to me. But your father also had another attribute.
My father was one hell of a character. He was also a terrific athlete. He played rugby for the Royal Air Force. In between the war, they still played rugby on Saturdays, and he turned out for the first team RAF. as a centre. He ran like the wind. He was built like an Adonis. When he was a medical student at Wits just before the war, he used to relish in going up and standing at the top of the classroom together with the professor of medicine, and he'd be there in his Speedo costume, and the lecturer would point out all the various muscle groups, and my dad loved this because he was going to win with the chicks on Saturday. So that was my old man, a total loose cannon, a terrific high diver off the high diving board. As I said, a champion athlete and rugby player, but a born showman as well. And as I say, you never knew what he was going to do next. And I think that showmanship, the way he flew aeroplanes as well, a little bit of that must have rubbed off on me, because I wanted to get into the air show business. Not business, the air show scene.
And in fact, one of your first flights in your father's Bonanza landed up almost as being an air show.
That, what happened there was, you talk about crew resource management and the management of things that put your flight at risk, and there's so much that is being taught in the field of CRM. But there I saw single pilot CRM at its very, very best. My dad he stopped flying after the war. I think he was somewhat traumatized by seeing his buddies being shot out of the air, as if in a turkey shoot. DAX at 110 knots, 1,000 feet above the ground, towing gliders, shot out of the sky, left, right, and centre. So my dad didn't want to fly after the war for a long time. But when I started, he started living his past life vicariously through me, and he got involved in flying. And so he bought this half share in a Bonanza. And late one afternoon, sun was already quite low, we took off, and as he retracted the gear, there was a hell of a bang. And there was obviously something wrong up front. And we looked at the gear indicator. There was a big red flag up or down, and this thing was stuck in the middle. And there was a green light and a red light, and neither of the right lights were burning, or both of them were burning. All I know is that, or illuminated, should I say, not burning, illuminated. So all I knew was that we had a major problem. And Petersburg was a very quiet place on a Sunday afternoon. So my dad lined the aeroplane up against the side of a mountain. A nice grassy mountain, not really a kopje, but just a nice grassy mountain. He had the sun over there, the aeroplane had a kopje over there, and he said, look at the shadow and see what the matter is. And sure as nuts, as we flew past this hill, there the nose gear was, stuck in the halfway position. So I said, no, we looked at this and we said, we've got a big problem over here, what are we going to do? So the airport was closed. But there was a fellow there, Gordon Wells. He was the customs official, the Met man, and the ATC, all in one. And we knew where he lived, Hoog Street nogal. So we went to Hoog Street with you know where Hoog Street is, with the Bonanza, and we went up and down. We beat the hell out of his house until he realized that there was something wrong. He'd come out, who these lunatics buzzing my house. And he got into his car, or his GMC truck, and he drove to the airport. Along the way, he phoned the fire and ambulance services. They got going, followed by the entire town. Nothing happens. Nothing happens in Petersburg on a Sunday afternoon. So the next thing, when we got to the airport, and we realized there was some sort of activity, we looked down, and it was like the greatest air show I've ever flown at, because without any advertising, the whole town had turned out and parked on the side of the runway. And the old man said, okay, now's the time to land, get in the back, I want the CFG right aft. And he held it off, pulled the mixture, and then cranked the engine to the horizontal, held it, and the nose came down. And that was crew resource management, or cockpit resource management at its very, very best. Before it had even been defined, there was a master of his craft.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah.
your first air show, but certainly not your last.
Now, which one was that?
No, I'm just saying that was your first air show.
That was my first air show,
First air
but
show.
certainly not my last.
Your taste of air shows.
You worry me, you know, when you say
that got you going.
Yeah.
Okay, but this was before you joined the SAF. You were learning to fly in matric.
I started with the PPL in matric, yes. Yeah.
And then you went on to matriculate at Capricorn Hoërskool.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Which is probably not the normal feeder institution for the South African Air Force.
No, you're quite right. At that stage, nobody had ever gone from Capricorn to the South African Air Force. I was the first, and then after that, there were a number of other guys.
So how did you get yourself accepted into the Air Force?
Well, I went to the Air Force gym. You know, luckily I was balloted. I went to the Air Force gym. I applied, and we had to wait for the matric results to come out. And when the matric, well, there were about 2,000 applicants. When the matric results came down, we were whittled down to about 800. You know, maths and science and all of that. We were whittled down to about 800. Then we went for aptitude testing. We were whittled down to about 265 that eventually came before the selection board, and of those they took 85 to Denota to learn to fly.
Okay, so you were, of the 85, off to Denota. And a fellow from Petersburg, not really part of the normal clan, who was being drafted into the Air Force. How were you accepted?
You know, I sort of had I had a terrific upbringing. In Petersburg, there were just terrific guys at school. I'd never really encountered any sort of adversity until I got to the Air Force gym. And there I am, a scrawny little 55-kilogram guy, and this burly sergeant comes walking past, and we for the morning inspection, and he says, "Levin." I said, "Ja, sergeant." He said, "Is jy 'n Jood? Are you a Jew?" I said, "Yes, ja, sergeant." He said, "Is jy bly?" In other words, are you happy about that? I don't know what the hell to say. I said, yeah. And so, you know, there was a certain amount of adversity. Yeah. That's how it started. Yeah.
The Afrikaner mafia wasn't really that accepting at the time.
After that, I was called a lucky charm.
Oh yes.
You know?
Yeah. Well, as we had in 1995 in the World Cup, we had to have a Jewish man to win the game for us.
Yeah, exactly. They said, "Do you remember Stransky? Do you remember Wolf Rosenberg? Do you remember Oki Geffen? Do you remember Sid Nomus? What?" I said, "Of course." So I guess I was happy to be one.
Okay, so you joined. You're one of the lucky 85, and you went on to
CFS, Central Flying School.
Central Flying School at Denota, and you came out top of your class.
Yeah.
So you actually
top of the group.
Top of the group. Yeah. Was that flying?
It was a mixture of flying and ground subjects.
Okay.
So there was the academic portion that counted for something, and then there was the flying. And the flying, there were 5 major disciplines that you were tested in: aerobatics, general flying, formation, night flying, instrument flying, and navigation. And all of what you had achieved at the end of those modules, they added up together with the ground subjects, etc., the academic side of things, and they came out with the result, and I was top of the course. Yeah.
Yes. Well,
and it wasn't the only time that you were top of the course. You went on from there to an instructor's school.
I went on to instructor's course, and there were 40 guys on the instructor's course. I think they were gearing up for hostilities or whatever, but there was a massive training initiative on the go. So there were 40 guys there, and they came from the squadrons. There were fighter pilots, transport pilots, helicopter pilots, all sorts of pilots on this course, and we were severely outranked. I mean, I wasn't even an officer yet, I was a cadet officer, but there were a whole lot of guys, captains, majors, full lieutenants, etc., etc., and I came first on that course as well.
And you ask why this is a Flying Legends show?
But then I became very, very arrogant and very, somewhat conceited. And
Well, you did actually have some problems with your commanding officer at Donato, I believe.
I did, yeah. And I was always in trouble, and I think, I don't know whether he had it in for me. I don't know whether he targeted me. I don't know whether he found me precocious and far too outward going, or I don't know whether he was trying to save my life. Sometimes you look at a guy and you say, this bloke is headed for an early demise. He and flying are not on the same page, and I don't know whether he was trying to save my life, but he
did ground you.
He grounded me, and he grounded me for 6 months, and he set me up. I had two students that were student instructors, not even pupil pilots, that outranked me. And I did low-level aerobatics with them, and he got them to put in reports about me, and grounded me for 6 months. And then I was wooing this chick at Wits University, and we were doing night flying, and you were allowed to leave the circuit from Donato and go over the city to practice the rejoining. But I stayed over at Wits University at the Women's Res and gave them a show. And some of you might remember the Tasker brothers. Yes. One of the Tasker brothers made his dear soul rest in peace. He phoned up and he reported me. By the time I landed, I had 3 weeks of extra duty. So my commanding officer was really after me. But what is important is that his wife loved me and used to comfort me, and I liked that.
And the young lady at Wits?
And the young lady at Wits, I brought her to a party at Central Flying School. And I think she led a sheltered existence. She never knew that pilots could drink as much as they could. And I think her eyes opened this size, particularly with the drive home from Donato to Johannesburg, and I never saw her again. But I found a much nicer one that I married.
So Scully, you had an interesting, let's put it this way, you had an interesting career in the Air Force.
I did, yes.
And it generated in you that love for aerobatics, which you've carried on through your whole career. Not only civilian aerobatics, but you've also, obviously, we'll talk about that later, done some sort of semi-aerobatic procedures with airliners as well. We'll come back to that. But you did eventually leave the SAF. And many of us will have heard various stories of Scully leaving the SAF. The SAF, the poorer for the fact that you left, obviously. Yeah. But there were, all sorts of stories about that. Now you maybe don't want to go into the detail.
You know what I always say? I say never ever let the facts interfere with a good story. So I've heard some wonderful stories, and I say, tell me more. I'm enjoying this. I really am. But the fact of the matter was that as I said, I was a very much a go-ahead guy. And as a cadet officer, in amongst lieutenants, captains, majors, and even lieutenant colonels, that really never went down that well. I was, and also I had firm opinions on certain things, and there were other issues as well. If ever you picked up a Rand Daily Mail, you were immediately branded as a communist. I don't know whether you can remember those days. But you never read the Rand Daily Mail. You could read the Transvaal, and you could read the Report or whatever. And so and I began to feel very, very stifled, and I got to the point where I realized that I never really had a future ahead of me in the Air Force. So I went to university, and I never really had a future there either. I met my wife there to be, and I did 3 years, and I left short of graduation, unfortunately. But I went to build up my hours to go to the airline.
So you were actually doing aeronautical engineering?
Yes.
And you have 3 years. So you've got another career.
I hadn't got as far as engineering. You did mechanical, and then you finished off in your 4th year with aeronautical.
Oh, so it was an add-on to a standard mechanical engineering degree. Okay. But you came out of there with a wife to be.
Sure.
Okay, so that was worth it. And while you were there, you started doing some instruction, civilian instruction.
I would go, because I could fly aerobatics, I used to go to Aerobatics, and I used to teach on the weekends. The Tiger Moth was the aerobatic aeroplane of choice. That's all we really had, Tigers and Chippies. So I did a lot of training in Tigers for guys, and then I flew one of these 180 aeroplanes you're talking about. I flew all sorts of things, Austers and Taylorcraft and Ronkers and you name it.
Did you fly Globeswift?
I flew Globeswifts and I loved them, yes.
Thank you, Scully.
Lovely aeroplane.
Okay, so that's actually, at that time you then got into competitive aerobatics as well, was it? At about the same time.
The late Vic Dobson, he was winning one South African championship after another, and he wanted some competition. And he lent me his Tiger Moth. He said, come and have a bash. And I was most grateful. I thought, how am I going to follow in this guy's footsteps? Because he was doing an English bunt. An English bunt is from there to there. You push it the whole way through and then you do a half roll. And that is commonplace today. I mean, it's easy peasy. But to do that in a Tiger Moth was quite something. Given that you never had proper harnesses, you had to, what they called a Sutton harness. A whole lot of canvas with holes in the canvas, and then a peg and a pin. And you told all the termites to ho fuss, all right? And you had this cockpit, this open cockpit, and you did an English bunt. And he had me doing English bunts, he had me doing inverted spins, and he had me doing tail slides. And in a tail slide, the wind comes through the propeller the wrong way. And if the idling was set too slowly, the engine would cut. And if the engine cut, you needed patience, courage, and fortitude to aim that thing at the ground and dive fast enough to get the engine to tick over. So I was flying competition in Tiger Moths with and against Vic. And then from there to the stomp, and then to the pit special, and then to a slight extent, but I became absolutely hooked and fanatic about competition aerobatics. I know John Gaylord won't agree with me because he's tried ever since then to get me back, but I quit when I quit for certain other reasons as well.
And you did stop, and I think there was a conscious decision to stop.
I stopped competition aerobatics. I was competing against the second highest power in the universe. After the Almighty, that's my wife. So she really didn't like me flying competition, so I stopped with the competition, and there was a hiatus for about 10, 11 years until I went to America on simulator duties, and I ended up at Dayton, at the Dayton Airfair. You know, that was the home of the Wright brothers, where the USAF Museum is. And I saw the Ray-Ban Golds with their pit specials. And I had an epiphany, you know, where You know, like in the Blues Brothers, those guys that just see something and they go off with a single-mindedness of purpose, and that's what I was going to do. I was going to start a formation aerobatic team.
Oh.
So that was the start of, you then, well, you bought a J3 Cub at some stage along the way.
I went around looking for sponsors. Wherever I went, I was turned away for sponsorship for a pit special and or an aerobatic team, a formation aerobatic team, and I was chased away. I don't think they even read my presentations. Tore them up and threw them away. And then one day I read about this guy in America that had landed on top of a truck. So I went out into the GF area, and please don't get the wrong impression over here, but I found a bus that was going down the highway at a hell of a speed. Patco bus, yeah. So I moved into position and I had a bash at this. And I saw that this would work. So then I approached Bob Althoff, the racing driver, who had a hell of a pedigree. He had doubled for Sterling Moss at Le Mans. He was one hell of a racing driver, and he also used to race that Ford Fairlane 500 at Cairn. And I said, Bob, let's try and do this. And Bob's right, just like that, he got Mitsubishi to give us a truck. We built a platform, we landed on his truck, and then the next thing, fortuitously, television was just starting up in this country. And they were hungry for anything that they could lay their hands on, so they laid their hands on the trucked up landing. And the next thing we were on television, and we were in Scope magazine, with or
without stars.
Here and there were a couple of women with the stars, and then the trucked up landing. And then when I started knocking on doors, I would say, I'm the guy that lands on top of the truck. Oh, come in, sit down, da-da-da. And the next thing I had a sponsor for the aerobatic team. So there was a little cub that enabled it all.
And your sponsor was...
The first one was Playboy. What had happened there, the guy's name was Philip Rolfe, and he had missed a flight out of New York, and he had nothing to do. And he was in the game of cosmetics and soaps and perfumes and shampoos with Palmolive, double barrel name.
Colgate Palmolive.
Who?
Colgate Palmolive.
Yeah, Colgate Palmolive. Yeah. And for $5 US, he bought the patent. Oh, he noticed that Hugh Hefner's team had not renewed their sponsorship in South Africa. So for $5, he bought the rights to Playboy here in this country. And then, of course, they panicked like hell, and there was a little bit of a payout. They allowed him to produce in the field of cosmetics and shampoos and underarm deodorants, etc., but nothing to do with the magazine or the other
Star attractions,
yeah, with the stars, yeah. So with or without. So what happened was there I was flying a Fritz special with little white bunnies all over it, and I flew that for a year, and then I said to him, let's start a formation aerobatic team. He said okay, and next thing I ordered 3 pit specials, all black, and they came from the factory. They were on the water, painted black, because then we were going to put the white livery on the bunnies and things. And then somehow there was a life-changing event, had to do with his wife and another lady. So, and I lost the sponsorship there and then while he took cover, and I ended up, and luckily Winfield stepped into the breach, and I got the Winfield sponsorship. That lasted for 4 years until there was a clampdown on tobacco advertising.
Scully, we're going to talk a little bit more about aerobatics just now, but in this process you'd actually joined South African Airways.
Yes.
1971.
Correct.
And that happened, obviously you had been developing your hours and your experience and so on with I presume the intention of getting into SAA, but you were still pretending to be a student at Wits as well. And you were dragged off to see some aeroplanes, and that led you into SAA?
I had a great friend that was an instructor with me at Central Flying School that joined the airline before I did, long before I did. He went from Central Flying School straight to the airline. I went to university. We stayed in touch. He said to me one day, come out and have a look at what it is that I do. So he fetched me from Wits. We went out to what was Jan Smuts Airport at the time, and we looked through the aeroplanes, and I sat in a Viscount, and I sat in a 707. There were no 747s. I sat in a 707, and he said, this is what I do, and he spoke to me for a while, and I went back, and I left university. And I just decided I'm not going to be an aeronautical engineer. This is what I really want to do. And so I built up my hours, went before the selection board, was accepted, and joined SAA in '71.
And stayed there for 38 years.
Another 38 years.
Yes.
Now, of course, as a youngster in the airline, you have to have a boy pilot story.
Oh boy. Yeah, we got 747s, and I think Carl was one of the very first guys to fly the 747. And I was still what they called a boy pilot. What did the boy pilot do? He sat behind the captain, and he waited there with the checklist. When the captain said, read the checklist, he read the checklist. He made up the bunks. He put the wet towels, made them readily available for the captain and the co-pilot. He wasn't allowed to fly the aeroplane below 20,000 feet, and you minded your P's and Q's. And one winter's evening, we left Las Palmas. We left the hotel in a bus. We got to the airport. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. It was freezing cold. Everybody looked good. Everybody smelled good. Everybody had come from the showers, and they were shampooed and shaved and snapped. And the captain was no exception. And his lordship sat down there in the left-hand seat, the co-pilot, and a huge big farmer, Willem Lourens, he was sitting in the right-hand seat. The engineer was sitting here next to the panel, and I sat there with the checklist waiting for the moment critique when he said checklist, and I would leap into action and read the checklist. And the next thing, the chief steward walked in, and he said, I've got lovely cream of mushroom soup. Yeah, everybody ordered cream of mushroom soup. And mushroom soup came, and I got this mug, and my word, it was steaming bloody hot. It really looked good. And everybody had their mugs, and I thought, now, if I start drinking and he calls for the checklist, I was really at pains to be hugely efficient. So I thought, best I drink the stuff as quickly as I can. So I started, but it was just too hot. And there were lovely pieces of mushroom, you know, huge big pieces of mushroom, like my pinky finger, sitting in this thick broth. And I saw him take his soup, and he put it under the air vent. Yeah. And I thought, that's bloody clever. That is clever. And the co-pilot, he was sitting in the riding seat. There were 2 air vents here, and the engineer had his. Now I'm looking around for an air vent. And where do I find an air vent? Yeah, just above the captain's head. This is cool. And the 747s were brand new. And the auxiliary power unit used to give you air. And boy, they could pump. So this air was coming out at 40 psi. Put my hand up like this. And I kind of got to squeeze it in between his head and the thing, and I turned the air. I told you I'm an enthusiastic guy, eh? So I turned the air vent on like this, and I see the air burrow. It actually burrows a hole into the suit, and the suit goes squish over the side, and it's raining down on his head. So I think to myself, what do I do now? You're trying to work out, if you've ever played snooker, you know that there's some sort of reaction. Do I move my hand this way, in which case, which way's the stuff going to blow? Make it or that way, or that way, or that way. And to make it worse, this guy jumps up in the bloody seat. He jumps up, like that. No space, and it's raining down epaulettes and his collar, and I see this huge big co-pilot, and he has turned and he's dug into his flights, actually, his whole body shaking. And the engineer, that drawer underneath the panel was only this deep. All he had to do was carry a computer and he's opened the bloody drawer and he's trying to get his head in there. His body is shaking and I am shaking with terror. Jumps up and around and he started swearing at me. I never knew he could swear like that. Yes, did he swear. He never repeated himself once. I was going to be like a real wet. Captain, I beg your forgiveness. Please, instead of just saying, geez, I'm sorry. I beg your forgiveness. And he sworn. Eventually I went and I fetched towels. Yeah, I am a red-blooded second pilot and I'm wiping him down. And I never got a stitch of sleep that night. He made me work the whole way to Joburg. So, and then I thought, that's it, my airline days are over. Finished. But
as it happens, of your group who started at the airline at that time, you went on to get command a lot sooner than everyone else.
I did, yes, yeah. I had a grade 1 instructor's rating. I was already a designated flight examiner with the CAA, so instead of going through all the fleets as a co-pilot and coming back as a captain, I got early command. Under 5 years, I was very, very lucky.
Yes.
And on a little thing called a Hawker Siddeley 748. So Hawker Siddeley, they called it the honk up suddenly because it used to wallow in the bumps and people used to get very sick flying in it. So I went to the Hawker Siddeley now.
And you flew those Hawker Siddeley's to exotic destinations.
We flew to Gaborone, Francistown, Victoria Falls, Matsapa in Swaziland, Maseru in Lesotho. We flew to all the neighboring states. They were very, very small. There wasn't a great demand for passengers. So we serviced it with a 40-seater. And that's where I got my first command on that little aeroplane, before I went back to jets.
And thereby hangs a tale.
Yeah. That aeroplane, I was a training captain. That's how I got my early command. And we had a four-legged flight that we did. We went Joburg, Gaborone, Francistown, Gaborone home. And on the sector Francistown to Gaborone, I had these two students, two co-pilots, and I had an urgent call of nature. So I left the cockpit and I left the one co-pilot, I said, take my seat, look after the aeroplane, and I went to the back, and I was sitting there on my royal throne, and I heard this wobble in the engines. They went out of sync, and the situation was getting worse and worse and worse. So that helped me time-wise. Get back to the cockpit. So I shot back, and as I walked through the cockpit door, I saw them messing around trying to synchronize the engines. I saw one or two abnormal readings, and in that instant I saw the overheat light come on, and I said, get out, quickly. And as I jumped in, so we got a fire warning, a fire bell, a fire light, and the engine was on fire. At the same time, we carried what was called a traveling engineer, and we had this ex-RAF traveling engineer, Parkinson. And he was in the back, and a little old woman said, excuse me, sir. They carried a lot of colonials on that sector. He said, yes, ma'am. She said, the engine's on fire, and it's just stopped. So he rolled his eyeballs, and he said, and he looked out the window, and the next thing he screamed, and he bounded down the aisle, and he ran into the cockpit. He said, we're on fire, we're on fire. But I'd already got the warnings, and we were doing the necessary checks. So we put the fire out, but actually the fire put itself out because it burnt most of the engine away, and it burnt the cowlings away, and it burnt part of the engine mounts. Because what had happened was a shaft, exactly like a prop shaft in a motor car, that goes from the gearbox to the differential. One of those had come loose. I forget what do you call those universal joints. A universal joint had come loose. This thing had punched a hole right through the combustion chambers, and the temperature in the combustion chambers is well over 1,000 degrees C. So it just burnt everything away. And we landed in Francistown, got all the passengers out of the aeroplane, didn't know what to do with them. Phoned Johannesburg, and I took the entire trolley out of the aeroplane, whatever snacks and booze there was, I gave to the passengers. And phoned Joburg, they sent a Dakota from Conair, 28 seats, and there were 32 of them. So I can't remember whether I had short straws or whether they had to write their names on a piece of paper and put them in a hat. And I said, those four of you are catching the train tonight. From Francistown to Gabs to Johannesburg. 28 of them got on a DAC. And the DAC, they flew back in the DAC. A C-130 arrived. Those were the days, SAA. C-130 arrived, another engine, a set of cowlings, engine mountings, cranes, lighting, welding, the tools like you've never seen before, and they worked right through the night. They worked through the night, but we had got rid of the last four, and there was no accommodation for us, but there was an engineer there that flew for Wenella, and Wenella were operating Dakotas and DC-4s. They had a big base at Francistown, and lots of housing, and we went home with a guy called Paddy Murphy, a proper Irishman with the name of Paddy Murphy. And when we got to his place, the shock set in. And what better way than to deal with shock with alcohol? So we never had many beers, but we finished them. We never had much hardtack, but we finished that, the whiskey and the brandy. And then we got started on the liqueurs. That's when it kind of got completely out of hand. Then eventually we said we all better go to bed. And we'd better go to bed. There was a flight steward there. There were the two, there was Parkinson. There were the two guys and myself. And the air hostess very wisely had locked herself in a bedroom. She'd locked herself, but there were 2 beds there. And she came and she told me that she was going to lock herself in the bedroom, but there were 2 beds there. And there were no beds for the rest of the guys, no beds. But by then, they couldn't have cared. And it was going to get cold in the desert there, semi-desert, and on the walls there were lion skins. There's a lion skin, a leopard skin, a zebra skin, this skin, and that skin. So we climbed up on the furniture and we pulled these things off the wall, and the guys wrapped themselves in these things, but not before they had crawled up and down the lounge, making the boys will be boys. It was actually hilarious, watching these guys on all fours, the responsible airline pilots and whatever. I went down the passage, knocked at the door, and the hostie wouldn't let me in. I had to promise and swear that I'd manage myself. Then she opened the door, and in I went, but not before I stumbled over at least 2 pieces of furniture and broke a light. One of these bedside lamps, smash, bang, into bed. And then we woke up the next morning. Murphy had a bucket of water thrown over him by his wife. Well, he was unpopular. And then we flew the aeroplane home, and about 3 days later, I get a message I must come to flight operations. Whoa, yeah. So we went up to flight ops. There the operations manager was, and he said, read this letter. The letter was from Mrs. Murphy. Now we had finished all of the booze. Now we had broken furniture. Now we had taken these things off the walls, and there was an account for damages, and then accommodation nogal. And I thought, that's it. I don't know how I'm going to explain my way out of this. And then he said, and by the way, the director of flight operations is waiting for you. And that was a guy called Bill van Rijn, who was a DFC, and he had no sense of humor. Zip, zero, no, nada, nothing. And his skin was pulled hell of a tight, and he had no hair. And his nickname, hell of a nice guy. Now, his nickname was the Screaming Skull, because he was the exact opposite. And he said, come in and sit down. He said, Captain, I'm happier on my knees. So he says, read this letter. Sheesh. And there it is, the exemplary behavior of Captain Levin and his crew. They spared nothing in ensuring that our needs were taken care of. What a doodah, the whole story about what wonderful guys we were. And he said, that's it, my boy, you keep it up. He doesn't know how close I came to having a heart attack with that. And I walked out, and the operations manager, Cathy Mowat, he looked at me with a twinkle in his eye, and he said, got you, hey? I said, jeez.
Got away with it. Scully, you have had some other scares, maybe not career scares like that one, but another fire. You had a fire in a pit.
I had a fire in a pit special. We were doing, what the air shows, they drop a parachutist and then they play the national anthem and you circle, and they never had smoke systems were in their infancy in this country, and this was, I think, one of the very first airplanes to have a smoke system, and it was a Heath Robinson affair, and there were loose wires running from somewhere to the smoke pump, and there was a circuit breaker. And what happened was that the guy jumped out of the aeroplane. This was at Springs. So some of you might even remember it. Down came the parachutist and we were circling and I had the smoke system on, and the next thing I looked down and I saw the circuit breaker had popped. And in all the Boeings and the Airbuses and this and that, they say, before you reset a circuit breaker, give it 2 to 3 minutes cooling. But I couldn't afford to give it 2 to 3 minutes cooling. Here you are in the middle of the air show. So I leant forward, the fuel tank was there, the circuit breaker was next to the fuel tank. In an assembly. Now there was something holding this thing, all made of plastic. Inferior aviation wiring, bought from somewhere. ABC radio supplies. And I pushed on the circuit breaker, and the next thing the whole assembly burst into fire, right underneath the fuel tank. Gee. I got the fright of my bloody life, and so I just abandoned this folly, and I remember trying to get this airplane, getting the airplane on the ground, but at one stage doing 160 miles an hour as I turned base and final, quite a tight final, and then a vicious side slip to kill the speed. And it touched down, then I got out and ran like hell. But the fire went out. It just burnt everything away over there. Luckily, the fuel never caught fire.
That wasn't your only engine fire. You had a similar event in Harvard, I think it was.
I had an electrical fire. I had an electrical fire, and my student was also a student instructor, not an experienced guy from one of the squadrons, and we caught fire and we said let's bail, and opened the canopy, loosened the straps, and I got up on the seat and I was going to go. I was getting up onto the seat, and at the same time I saw the ground there in the corner of my eye, and I thought, to hell with this. So I got back in, and got a hell of a lot of smoke and this and that. But luckily, electrical fires usually go out fairly quickly once you remove the power source, unless they become self-sustaining. And so we landed. If any of you landed near Belfort, that beautiful Cape Dutch gabled place,
Yes.
and the lady of the manor came out, gave us coffee, gave us toasted cheese sandwiches, and I thought I was doing this more often. It was lovely.
We looked at a couple of the other scares that you'd had over the years, and I'm sure that there are plenty more. An engine failure in Percival Prentice.
Yeah, that
Early on when you were doing your instruction marathon,
two RAF pilots brought a Percival Prentice. I don't know whether anybody knows what that aeroplane is. Army Air Cooperation aeroplane with a big sort of with seating for forward at the back and windows that you could open, and it had a Gypsy Queen. That's a 6-cylinder Gypsy inverted inline engine, and they brought this thing from Europe to Johannesburg, to Wonderboom. In fact, they'd sold it there, and it stood languishing for a long time, and then they looked for a sucker to ferry this thing to Baragwanath. So it gave problems there. Caught fire on starting up, and there were people with fire extinguishers, and they hammered and knocked with this and that, and they said it'll be okay, and I got airborne, and I had 2 varsity pals with me. And the one guy, it was very hot, he was sitting in the back, he'd opened the windows, he took his shirt off, he was sunbathing while we were crossing Johannesburg, and passing a beam Grand Central, the engine started running very, very roughly. And I was, Grand Central is on a little bit of a rise. I was losing height very rapidly, and they were still building that highway. No tar, nothing. And I turned to land on the, whatchamacallit there, and it was 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and 2 guys were coming off duty, and they had these pickup trucks, and they were racing down the very road that I was trying to land on. So there we were, a threesome. They looking at each other, and this engine's coughing and spluttering and pumping smoke, and I'm sitting there trying to extend the glide to get over them, which I did. They kind of jammed on brakes, and I came to a stop. Got out of the aeroplane. I said to the other two, let's get the hell out of here. And we left the aeroplane on the highway, ran through the grass, and got to the old Johannesburg Road and hitchhiked back to Grand Central. And the next day, there was something in the newspaper about burning aeroplane, forced lands on highway, and the occupants believed to be university students had fled the scene. Better than doing the paperwork. So that was the personal practice. Yeah.
And then a Prince let you down with an engine failure as well.
You might wonder why all this is happening to me, but the thing is that
this is over time.
Over time, and I could never say no. People would say, "You're the only person with this on your license. You're the only person that can help us. Please, would you?" And I was never one to say no. So I used to help out. So there was this special that came from. It had stood in the sun in Saudi Arabia for about 10 years, and somebody here bought it, and it was rebuilt, and they did a top overhaul on the engine, and I test flew it, and I did the run-in on the engine, but that was just the top overhaul. Meanwhile, there was something else lurking inside this pits. So eventually, the third flight, I had to do the time to climb, 5-minute time to climb, and you take your altitude in 30-second increments. So I got the wind was blowing like hell, 30 knots, and it was freezing cold. And I got airborne out of Rand, and I went down into the valley with 1013 set, so I got the altimeter to read 5,000, scooting across past Panorama at treetop height. That was 5,000, waiting for the time. And I don't know whether you guys know the difference between what they call a mayday and a pan. Pan is urgency. Mayday is help me. This is I'm in distress. Somebody's going to die here. So there's a very definite difference between a pan and a mayday. And you call a mayday when you're going to die, or you're in severe distress. And there I am at 5,000 feet, just above the trees, and I open up, and I raise the nose, and I think it was a matter of 5 or 6 seconds. I don't think I even got 100 foot to 150 foot, and I suffered a catastrophic failure of the engine. Absolutely catastrophic. The connecting rod went right through the crankcase, the propeller stopped, and they were building that pipeline across the GF area, just out here. And I just dived and turned simultaneously and then flared. And I remember clumps of bricks here and sand there and rocks there, and the road kind of curved. It was just a one-way little track, and I remember rubble and trees and kicking the rudders and and eventually I got this thing, brought it to a stop, not a scrap of damage, and coming towards me were 3 guys, and they were walking like this. You know that walk which says, "I am up to no good." And I looked at them and they looked at me, and I thought, here I am in the middle of the veld, and I could just see, sorry to say this, but I just saw that was huge blade troubles. Mayday, mayday, mayday. I felt like such a poople, you know. Here I am on the ground, I've landed, and I'm okay, but I'm calling you later. And it was a helicopter from Hindley, came over the top, and they ran away. But I thought, this is it, I'm going to get lynched over here.
And instead you were airlifted out. Like,
and then I was airlifted out, you know. Yeah, I was airlifted out. It was a frightening moment.
What happened to the aeroplane?
Once again, I walked into the, I said, your aeroplane's in the felt. Right. Do you know how to handle the paperwork? Yes, we do. Cheerio, goodbye.
And it was untouched when they went for
Untouched,
it?
yeah, they got it out of there that afternoon on a flatbed. Yeah.
Yes. Like Arnie's plane.
So, I don't know, we've all sat in the back of various aeroplanes with Captain Levin in the front, flying it. We don't realize how we were putting our lives at risk, given these stories that we've been hearing here this evening.
This was over 55 years. Yeah.
Scully, but right in the early days, as you were still a pupil pilot at the Notta, or maybe you were instructing at the Notta at the time, you had a close call with the Harvards.
Yeah. You know what used to happen at Central Flying School? We had 7 parallel runways. Never mind one runway. Yeah. You know, a runway in one direction. We had 7 runways, and we would have as many as 25 aeroplanes in the circuit. 25 aeroplanes in the circuit. But there were left-hand circuits, there were right-hand circuits, and you got your runway allocation turning final. You got one of 3 runways on the left, or one of 3 runways on the right, and the middle one was reserved for the overflow. And by the same token, we went to the general flying area, 25 aeroplanes in the general flying area, without this 1258 and the 1256 and talk. You looked out.
Currently.
You were taught to look out, and your head had to be swiveling all the time. It was head outside the cockpit, and you had to manage your instruments and the accuracy at the same time. So there was very, very little talk. You went out there, you flew, and you looked out. And as an aside, I've just come from Oshkosh, and I met a guy my age that flew Harvards, that learnt on Harvards, that was in the US Navy. And he said that they did everything they did, radio silence. They were being trained for the day that they went into war. They were also working on the premise that they would come back with their radio equipment shot out. And the US Navy did all their training without any talk ever. You know, so I really believe that we overtalk. We talk ourselves to death over here. We really do. It's unbelievable. You can't get it. If ever there was a threat to air safety, it's the amount of talking that goes on in the radio. So there I was in the general flying area, and I was doing a loop, and you had to pull through the bottom at exactly 175 knots, and that took some doing. You took a certain angle, you started pulling at exactly 171, and you had to go through the horizon at 175. It was all about the future to come and managing your energy in a combat situation. And I pulled like this, and now my focus changed to in front of me, and there was Charles du Toit in a Harvard crossing my flight path, and I was going to hit him. And all I could do was do a 3/8 of a roll and pull like hell, and I shot through his flight path upside down, the distance of Athol from me to you. My tail went through right in front of him upside down. And we could have distributed ourselves in kit form all over the Eastern Transvaal area. You know, it was amazing how close we came.
And I'm sure there must have been many incidents of similar nature with 25 airplanes in
we had a couple of mid-air collisions. Mike Copeland.
I was in that one.
Yeah, he had
With my couplet, I was in there.
Were you in that formation? Would you like to tell people quickly?
No, this is your
No,
night.
not.
But Jeff was involved in a mid-air collision, a three-ship formation, and somebody doing what we call an IF, a spin under the hood. You had to be able to spin under the hood. And the aeroplane spun right through the middle of the formation. And in Mike Copeland's, he came to, he'd been ejected, and he was floating down in his parachute. You never know whether it was his subconscious, because I know when I had my engine failure, I saw a hand out there going to the high pressure cock, the low pressure cock, the feather pump, the fire handle, the fire extinguisher, and there was a hand out there, and it wasn't mine, but it was mine. It was detached. It was doing things. You know, in an extreme emergency, there's the rule of primacy. Your body goes back to what it knows. I saw this hand, just handling the whole thing. And 10 to 1, Mike actually got out and pulled the ripcord and has no recollection of that.
He actually was still attached to the seat, tumbling with the seat.
Detached
the seat and pulled it.
I say, with seat and all, eh? Yeah.
And on your occasion, when you looked at this option of getting out of the aeroplane, you not liked what you saw, and you got back in again.
Same sort of thing, yeah. Same sort of thing. I was halfway out the aeroplane, and you know, there was that instance when I landed, when I did a forced landing outside of Petersburg on the Easterberg, just outside Petersburg, and my son was in the front cockpit. He was 11 years old, and he said, "Dad, why did you handle me so roughly?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You grabbed me by the scruff of my neck and you pulled me right out of the cockpit." And I have no recollection of doing that. But I was very worried about this fire. We were going to Petersburg to do the truck top landing in Port Pietersrust. We were crossing the Easterberg, and that's when someone had left a muslin rag in my fuel tank. I don't know whether it was sabotage or neglect or whatever, but it blocked off the fuel. I had an engine failure in the Easterberg region, so we force lobbed there, and I had a little radio that doubled as a portable, and I knew my exact lat and long on the chart. So I went to the Airways frequency. I knew there was a service from Bulawayo, and Dave King, a home builder, remember him?
Yeah.
Dave King, with a very ease. He was upstairs. I said, "Dave, I'm sitting on top of a mountain, and I've had an engine failure. Can you notify the authorities?" And an Impala came and circled and got my Latin long, and my son and I sitting there at the site of the accident or the forced landing, and then a chopper came and took us back to Petersburg, Polokwane, Petersburg those days. And I pulled Ellis clean out of the front seat. But then on the Monday, you know, they used to go back to school and they had talk and tell. And Ellis is he's deadpanned at the best of times, and so he stands up and he said, "I went to an air show with my father. The engine cut and we landed on top, we crashed on top of a mountain. A fighter jet came and circled. And, no. My dad radioed a Boeing that was flying overhead, and he sent a fighter jet to come and have a look. After the fighter jet had flown over us, a helicopter came and it took us off the mountain and back to the Air Force Base. That afternoon, my wife gets a call from the teacher. The teacher says, "You have to do something about your son. He's lied. His stories, he's in cuckoo land. He's telling the most incredible stories." So my wife says, "No,
That's true.
that's absolutely true." So she puts the phone down, the teacher, and she says, Levin family is really, am I going crazy or they crazy or what? But it was all true. It was just the way Ellis told it. So,
I think he learned from the master. Pulling, rolling, you don't only do this in a light aircraft. You have on occasion done this in something that resembles an airliner.
I did it out of necessity. I was in a Hawker City 748 late at night doing training, and I had two captains under training. So I was in the right hand seat. I had a captain under training in the left seat, and I had one on the jump seat doing circuits and landings. And you were handed over to various frequencies at Joburg International. And I was on what they call approach frequency, and it was at the time of the Biafran conflict, and there were mercenary pilots, and they were flying supplies into either the Congo or Biafra or wherever. And they would come down to Joburg, they would get arms, ammunition, food, medical supplies, all sorts of things. They would load up with the most beaten out aeroplanes you ever in your life come across. Mainly Douglas DC-4s.
There's one standing outside here.
Exactly. And I heard this guy on the radio, and I still said to one of the pilots, HK, HK, hier kom groot. Just listening to the guy on the radio, I thought, there is going to be an incident here tonight, because this guy didn't know what he was saying on the radio. I handed him over to the tower. He landed up ahead of us. I was still on approach. When I went to tower, he was on ground. So I never heard from him again. And we did the approach on tower, but the guy ahead of us, the Biafran, he was on ground. And we landed, and we opened up, and we were running down the runway waiting for our speed. You had to wait for the engines to stabilize. This is in the Hawker City. Mercifully, a straight-winged aeroplane and not a swift-wing. Straight-winged. And we were running down the runway, and I looked down the runway, and I saw two pools of light on the tar. And I thought, that's interesting. Now, boardstiff, eh? Boardstiff. It's only about our 15th landing. And I look and I think, how do they do that? I've never seen that before. Gee whiskers, I must have a look as we get closer to see how they do that. I thought maybe there was some sort of subterranean lights. But unbeknown to me, this guy had got lost, and he had stopped on the runway, and ground control was not liaising with delivery clearance, who had given TAP, the Portuguese airline, start clearance, and there was down in the freight apron there was a red light flashing, and the tower thought that was the aeroplane, so they cleared me to land. And I had landed, I was looking at these lights, and the next thing silhouetted here at 100 to 150 meters. That's nothing. That's nothing at 100 knots. Here was this DC-4 blocking the runway. And I never had flying speed. But these British airplanes, are terrific. You know, they all fly like chipmunks and Spitfires and things. And I snatched and rolled, the right wing virtually going through the grass, and the stick shaker shaking on the judder, headed towards the Anglo-American hangars, and I saw the tail of this DC-4 pass just under the wing. Got the fright of my life. That was what the two pools of light were. You know, the DC-4's lights never shined out that way. They shone that way. And first thing I did, you know, you always cover your backside. Tower, confirm that we were clear to land. Yes, you were clear to land. AFIN. So I said, well, you just missed a DC-4 by the skin of our teeth. And with that, I don't know whether any of you have ever had adrenaline fits, that your legs start bouncing, and they were bouncing clean off the rudder pedals. What the fright of my life. Now, so I was lucky to get away with that. The two other pilots, they said, every day we live from this day onwards is a bonus. and the one guy you might know was Sid Bottom, not a DFC, what's the other one? Air Force Cross. Air Force Cross, quite a player. Old Sid Bottom was one hell of a guy. Yeah. Royal Air Force Cross.
This DC-6 outside, you can see the lights are partially extended, which gave you the pulse.
And it was just curiosity that never killed the cat. It was curiosity that saved me. Looking at those things and saying, because otherwise, if I hadn't paid any attention to those lights, we would have hit that aeroplane, and there would have been a fireball from there to Kempton Park.
Yeah. Yeah.
Luck and divine providence.
Providence.
Yeah, divine providence.
Well, fate is the hunter if you read Ernest Gadd.
What's that?
Well, fate is the hunter if you read Ernest Gadd.
Yeah.
You said the aeroplane it was a British airplane. It handled like a chipmunk, or a tiger moth, or a Spitfire, or a Sea Fury.
You know, the Brits build an aeroplane, and then they put a pilot, and then they just populate this thing with all sorts of systems, and the gauges are everywhere, and the controls are everywhere. You know, just to raise a Spitfire's gear, you've got to change hands, and you know, it's this sort of exercise. I don't know what they're thinking about when they build these aeroplanes. The chipmunk is the same. Everything's in a funny bloody place, and the pilot is an afterthought. Then they make place for the pilot, and in you go, and anything can be anywhere. But having said that, the flying qualities, I don't know how many of you have or have not flown chipmunks, but the chipmunk is just the most beautiful, sweet handling aeroplane you have ever in your life flown. It is just such a lovely, lovely aeroplane. Now you take that chipmunk, and it's got a 145 horsepower engine. You take most of the Merlins that are in the Spitfire, and the Spitfire has got 1450. But the Spitfire flies like a chippy. It flies too beautifully forwards. The Spitfire handles like a chippy. So I always say that the Spitfire is a chipmunk that has a steroid factor of 10. It's got 10 times the power, a steroid factor of 10. And you go from the Spitfire to the Sea Fury. When you sit in that Sea Fury, that is a monster of an aeroplane. That is a big aeroplane, and you say, oh my word, how am I going to fly this thing? But that thing has got more or less 3,000, call it 2,900
Horsepower.
Yeah, 2,900 and horsepower, and that is exactly 20 times what the Chippy has got. So it has got a steroid factor of 20, and compared to the Spitfire, it's got a steroid factor of 2. And how does the Sea Fury fly? It flies like a pussycat. It is the most delightful aeroplane to fly. It handles too beautifully for words. And the Brits got that right. The Brits got that right with the Tiger Moth, with the Haven Rapide, with Chippies, with Spitfires, with all sorts of British aeroplanes. They fly very, very nicely, if you can find where all the controls are.
Scully, I remember you've obviously flown both, and I remember many years ago getting airborne out of Bethlehem at the end of an air show and taking off on the grass runway, and as I was cleared for takeoff, the guy in the tower said, clear takeoff, but keep an eye open because there's a Spitfire and a Sea Fury in the circuit.
That's correct.
Now I wonder how many times I'm going to hear that again.
I don't think you will see that again. But you had a picture, Ethel, front page of African Pilot, of that particular formation. It was I think John Sayers' Sea Fury and Andrew Torr's Sea Fury.
Spitfire.
Spitfire, yeah. And I had done the display that day.
It was from the Douglas DC-3.
You took it from a DC-3.
On the way to Stellenbosch.
No. This was coming back from Bethlehem to Johannesburg.
Oh, yes.
In the late afternoon over the Van Dam. Yeah.
So you've had the fortune of flying a Spitfire. Obviously,
you know,
it must be a very special moment.
A Spitfire, you remember each and every flight, and you document them. And I started off, I was promised a ride in the Spitfire. Then I got my ride in the Spitfire. Then the owner asked me to go and ring it out. I had to go and test the two-stage supercharger. You have a supercharger that takes you to 11,000 foot. And then as you climb higher, off an aneroid switch, the second supercharger clicks in, and that gives you a kick in the butt like you can't believe, and it takes you up there to as high as you want to go. It'll outclimb a vampire, the Spitfire. So he asked me, well, I never had oxygen, so I only went as high as 17,000, and then I tried all sorts of things with the Spitfire, you know, the myth of the torque roll, and the myth of this and the myth of that, and I stalled it. I did everything short of spinning the aerobatic, did all the aerobatics. That was the second flight, and I thought, well, that's it. I'm lucky to have had 2 flights in the Spitfire. And then, amazingly, we were at Swartkorp, and the owner, Andrew Torr, said to me that he promised the guys at Glendower Golf Course a fly past in Edenvale, and he couldn't do it. Would I do it? I said, would I do it? So this is actually in Johannesburg's airspace. But it is easier to ask for forgiveness than it is to ask for permission. And I ask you, would you stand the risk of losing the opportunity, or would you do it? Obviously, I did it. So I scooted across town, and I got to Linksfield Ridge, where I turned left. I penetrated the Jan Smuts Airport's hallowed airspace at about 150 foot. I looked for Glendower Golf Course, and I turned, and I came over the clubhouse and down the main fairway. Nice fairway, in a Spitfire between the trees. Thought, geez, that was nice. Came around, did another one. You should never revisit the scene of the crime. But I did. So I thought, to hell with this. 2, certain. And then you know, there are a lot of developments there. There's Glendower, and there's Glendower Extension, and there's this place and that place. And there's always a little bit of neutral territory in between these suburbs, and that's the line of least resistance that I took. Then I found myself next to this highway that I'd once upon a time landed on, and I was scooting down the highway, but I was still staying under the radar, and I was whizzing down the runway, and would you believe this? There's my wife with my 2 daughters, and they said, "Hey, Mom, there goes Dad in the Spitfire." And she said, "Don't be silly. Your father would never fly at that height." but how'd you like that for a bloody coincidence?
In time for the argument.
Yeah.
This is the second highest power in the world.
The second highest power in the universe.
In the universe. Not me. Scully, we've heard some wonderful stories so far.
Lovely.
We probably need to take a break. You probably need to
Have some
have some water. And you guys might want to have a little break. So 10-15 minutes, we're going to come back, we're going to talk about a bit of formation aerobatic experience. We're going to talk about doing formation aerobatics in airliners. Just
I don't
as
know
one
formation
does.
aerobatics.
Okay. You know.
Formation, yeah.
Yeah.
Close.
Close,
Yeah.
exactly. So we're going to talk about those sort of things, and then we're going to look at Scully's retirement.
You're lovely.
Thank you, Scully. It's been a great. At the break, I had a number of people come up to me and say, "You've got to ask Scully about this story. You've got to ask him about that story. You've got to ask him about the next story." And I see you've actually been having your own private audience here and telling a whole lot of stories to individuals already. So I don't know what's left for you to talk to us about. But why don't you tell us about how you refuel a crop spray?
Okay, now, you know, when guys get their commercial pilot licenses, they're really desperate for jobs. So this is actually not my story. This was a fellow called Tom Goddard, and his very, very first job, he really battled to get a job, and he never had much tail drag at time, but he got a job as a crop spraying pilot. And this was at the bottom of the food chain, so he was going to start on a Super Cup. And the Super Cup, these days a lot of them have got disc brakes, but in the old days they had these terrible, terrible like bladder brakes. And they really, it was difficult to control the aeroplane using the brakes, and you couldn't bring it to it. There was always asymmetric braking. The one worked better than the other, the one didn't work at all, and you had steering problems with these aeroplanes. So Tom Goddard goes along to the engineers and he says, "I'm starting crop spraying tomorrow for the first time in my life, and I want you to please ensure that the brakes are sorted out." So they work on the brakes. He takes the aeroplane and he does his first sortie of spray, ever. Then he lands. When you land, you go up to where they replenish your insecticide. Okay. So what the gaff is that there's a huge big pond or a pool or a tank where they mix the insecticide, goes from there to a Honda cup that is this size. And there's a huge big pipe that goes to this Honda. From the Honda, it goes to an attachment on the bottom of the Super Cub, and the whole back seat is given over to a tank. And then you clamp this thing in, and then you give a signal, or the guy that does the clamping gives a signal, and whoosh, they open up a valve, and the Honda pumps the insecticide into the tank which is on the back seat. When that is done, they close, they decouple, and they knock on the top of the fuselage. Pop, pop, pop. That means that you can go. And you open up and you take off and you go and spray the next field. So Tom Goddard comes in, and he's still battling with the Super Cub, and he's going like this to an extent to keep the thing straight. He pulls up near the Honda, this little auxiliary power unit, they attach, they fill him up, and the guy that is doing the filling is also new, and he goes, tap, 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 and off Tom goes with the pipe and the Honda. And the aeroplane, every time the Honda's being dragged through the dirt, the aeroplane decelerates, and every time it bounces into the sky, the aeroplane lurches forward. And then, depending on where it hits, left or right of dead center, the runners are doing this. And Tom Goddard is screaming and hurling all sorts of abuse at the engineers. These bloody engineers can't figure fix that. What the hell? And here I am struggling with this airplane. I told him to fix the thing. This is what's going through his mind while the airplane is lurching slow, fast, left, right, etc., etc. Then she got into the sky, and then there was an almighty bang as he dragged the Honda through the trees, and it actually ripped the tank clean out the side of the Super Cup. There's a hell of a draft. And where the back seat was, there was a big gap. And that was Tom Goddard and the top spray.
You didn't crash.
Scully, you didn't crash that time, yeah. Scully, we said we were going to talk about some aerobatics. You've got 2 aerobatic teams that you've been involved with for a long time.
Yep.
And I asked you this morning when we were talking, why 2? And I suppose it's why do you have more than one aeroplane? It's the same sort of thing.
Exactly. It's just they're so different. They present different challenges. They're both delightful airplanes to fly, and it's terrific to be able to fly for 2 teams. So vastly different. The Harvards with grunt, attitude, bulk, power, history. You know, everybody loves Harvards. We have such a rich heritage in terms of Harvards. You know, our whole Air Force was trained on Harvards for years and years and years. They're just wonderful aeroplanes. So it's a hell of a privilege to fly Harvards at this stage of one's life still. And then of course the pit specials, they're just something special. That's what they are. Special aeroplanes.
Beautiful handling.
Lovely handling, they're agile. They're not up there with the extras and the MX2s and the Lynn 50s, etc., etc., etc. But you must understand that the Pitts is about 75 years old. It's a very old design. And Curtis Pitt certainly was a genius for designing such an aeroplane. That is still really very competitive, still, at this stage.
Would you want to be doing what you could do in extras, etc., and putting those G-forces at this stage?
I don't think I could. You know, guys like Nigel Hopkins are pulling 8-9G. I am in chiropractor territory at 5 to 5.5 G. I go from the aeroplane to the physio or the chiropractor, and he pulls me straight. I'm very happy flying the aerobatics I fly because I seldom, if ever, go above 5G. Really, I'm never above 5G. I happen to love formation. I don't believe that anything looks as beautiful or as graceful as aeroplanes in formation. I love the camaraderie. I love to be around other guys doing things with like-minded people.
So you took this formation concept with your 2 teams. Flying Lions has been going for 19 years.
19 years.
And your Pitts team has been going for
34 years.
So it's a lifetime for both, really. And I know that you were responsible together with Arnie for forming this team. That came about as a result of an air show way back in Virginia.
19 years ago. What happened was after the Air Force got rid of their Harvards, or towards the end of the tenure of the Harvards within the Air Force, there were no Harvard formation aerobatic teams. And the South African Airways apprentice school had built up 2 beautiful Harvards, really beautiful. The chief pilot of SAA was a fellow called Johan Dries. A lot of people know very little about this guy, but if ever there was really a wonderful, wonderful pilot, it was Johan Dries, and also someone in love with flying. And we were sort of kindred spirits. I was always junior to him in the airline, but I remember in Las Palmas talking, flying. We'd landed at 9 o'clock at night and we saw the sun come up, and we were still drinking beer at 9 o'clock in the morning and talking flying without getting plastered, just slowly having a beer or two and talking flying right through the night. And we got on very well together, and we started the radial pair at South African Airways with 2 harbours. The guy that actually reactivated me in the harbour is sitting right here. That's Brian Stableford. Brian Stableford got me back into the harbour, reactivated me, and then Johan and I started the team. And we flew as the radial pair for about 4 years, and one evening we did a night show at Virginia with these 2 harbours. And when I was walking back to the clubhouse after we'd put the aeroplanes away, Arnie Meneghelli had just bought a couple of harbours, and he hijacked me on the staircase. He said that in his opinion he'd never seen anything more beautiful than 2 harbours flying formation aerobatics. Would I teach him? And I thought, oh yeah. I said, yeah, I'll teach you. I said, but you've got to make a commitment. And boy, did he make a commitment. He learnt, he flew Harvards for the first time at 50. He learned to fly aerobatics at 51. And then he learned to fly formation, and he was flying formation aerobatics at the age of 52. So you're never too old to start. And we went from 2 aeroplanes to 3 to 4 and a spare aeroplane. And that's how the Flying Lions were born. And he's totally committed and totally besotted about these Harvards.
And a good person.
And what a great benefit that's been to all of us who love to hear the sound of the radial engines and see the Harvards in formation. Wonderful.
And then he went on to join us in the pits team, and now he and Ellis are flying the extras together. So, I think we all share this passion. Everybody sitting here. It's just something that you can't define.
Scully, you took this formation flying then into the airline. Not content with flying the biggest aeroplanes in the world, you now decided it's best to fly them in formation because they look better that way.
Well, what actually happened there was, you all know about the flight past at Ellis Park with Laurie Kay. And that evoked something within the entire nation and in aviation as well. And the next thing, I think it was Becky's first inauguration, and or even Nelson Mandela's. I'm not too sure, because I did a whole lot of these things eventually. And what happened was that they said, let's fly a formation over the Union buildings, and this had never been done before. So the airline said this is a damn good idea, to fly a 3-ship, a tight 3-ship formation. I mean, who does that besides the South Africans? So Laurie Kay got to lead the formation in a, you can't just suck these aeroplanes out of anywhere. So we were actually decommissioning the 747 Classics. He got to fly the Classic and to lead, and Jeff Birch flew on the right wing, the late Jeff Birch, and myself on the left wing. He sat right wing, left seat, so that he was closest to the 747, Laurie's 747, and I flew left wing, right seat, so that I could see the lead aeroplane. So there we are with the 3. There we were with the 3 aeroplanes, and fortuitously, we all flew for the same aerobatic team. We'd flown for the Winfield team, for the Chubb team, so we were like-minded guys. We thought alike. We were a trusted and tried combination, except that we'd never done this in a 747 before. So we went out onto the apron, and we paced out the required separation, and we looked on the apron for reference points. You always line up on certain reference points, and we worked out that if we had the inboard and outboard engines lined up, and then we lined up with the navigation light on the tail plane of the 747. If that navigation light on the stabilizer was in line with the hinge line of the rudder, then we had a line here and a line there, and where the two joined, that is where we sat. So we had our points, and we went out. Jeff and I took 2 747s, lekker. You know, like you say, I'll take the 2 RVs. We took 2 747s and we went to Ventersdorp. So I wonder what our Eugene thought. But we practiced to see whether we could get this right. And we learned how to fly formation with the two. Well, we knew how to fly formation, but we perfected it. So we got that right. And that was, I think, on a Wednesday afternoon. We reported back to Laurie on the Thursday, and by the Friday we put all the plans in place. And what we learned was very, very interesting. And that is, that man there, who is my formation mentor, always said to me, you stay in the same plane. Jeff Earl said, you always stay in the same plane, so that that it's easier to keep formation. And what happens is, if this is the lead aeroplane and the number 2 is here, if you go into a right-hand turn, this aeroplane has to fly slower on the inside of the turn. But it's also, with the size of the jumbo, it's got to go down 250 foot. And a jumbo doesn't lose 250 foot without gaining speed. So, because it's a very, very clean jet aeroplane. So, as you go down, so you have to slow down because you're on the inside of the turn, and you have to stop the speed increasing. So it becomes a two-handed thing. The one guy's flying, and the other guy has brought the thrust back to idle, and he's pulling the speed brake to stay in formation. The guy on the outside of the turn has to climb 250 foot, and you don't climb a jumbo 250 foot without losing speed. So you've got to go around thrust. You've actually got to firewall the engines and go to maximum thrust going to the top of the turn. And this is what we learnt. And when we had buttoned this up, we actually became quite windhot. And we said to Laurie Kay, lay it on. So not only did we do the fly past over the Union buildings, but we gave the fly past over, then we came back, gave them a little bit of entertainment, and then still lined up and did a beautiful fleur-de-lis break. I mean,
as one does with a sim.
Exactly. Position is 90% of the. I've just got a tick. It's okay. It's okay.
The tick is
I
in
just thought I was going crazy. Okay, but anyway, so we got that right, and we went on to do another 5 or 6. We did another 2 presidential inaugurations, 2 for Thabo and Becky. We did a Star Alliance fly past. We did the World Cup cricket final. But we started mixing airplanes. Sometimes we had a Boeing and 2 Airbus, 1 Airbus, 2 Airbuy. We had 2 Airbus, Airbuy, and then sometimes we had Boeings here and an Airbus over there in the front. But we did about 6 of these things, and some of them I always drew the short straw and sat on I either led or I flew on the left-hand side. But we always had guys that had formation savvy. We taught Johnny Woods very nicely, our chief pilot, and he was very proactive. He was keen to learn, and he had the right attitude. So he flew most of them. Johan Dries flew them. I flew them, and Flip Vermeulen. You know, the stalwarts. All the guys that have been around in the air show scene, in the EAA scene, they were the same guys, that they were the obvious choices for these fly pasts.
You also did one in England. You used to do them with the 747 in England.
I did that at Yeovilton, Royal Navy, Yeovilton, yeah. And regrettably, we had to leave to fly back, only to hear that we had one show of the day.
Was this the climbing turn out of Yeovilton?
Yeah. The big challenge about flying in England, by the way, they are so air-minded. They are so air-minded. It is lovely to fly there. But you can't believe how many of these little hamlets there are, these tiny little towns, tiny little dorpen. And wherever you look, you see them, and every one of them, they're noise-sensitive areas. So you go for your briefing for this major air show, and they say you can't fly here, you can't fly there, you can't. Not like us. We just fly anywhere. You know, as long as you don't infringe the display line towards the crowd. But in England, it was quite a challenge to have to turn around these tiny little towns. But we nevertheless, you know, won top air show top display for the air show. We weren't there to receive it.
Scully, you also,
I hope you received it.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Scully, you also drag in other airplanes. You drag in sort of Falcons.
Yeah, our formation wasn't just limited to fly pasts for sporting and political events. There were 6 of those, as I said, and that was heavy metal. They were always the biggest and the best. They were 747s and A340-600s. But the thing that I really loved, and I don't know how many people ever saw that show, but it was quite radical. We had 2 737s, 2 freighters, and the freighters weren't being utilized during the day. They were utilized at night. So Pierre Gous is a formation nutter, and he came up with the idea of us doing a formation show with 2 737s. And I'm not talking about fly pasts here, I'm talking about full air shows with steep turns in formation right in front of the crowd. And they were terrific shows, really. They were just outrageous in concept. Who gets 2 737s and flies them in a tight formation at an air show, other than the South Africans? And that's what we did. And we flew at Easterplaat twice. I had my daughter as the co-pilot on one of those flights. We flew in Durban, we flew at Swartkop Air Force Base, and on occasion we also led the Silver Falcons. And we normally just led them in and they broke away, and eventually we said, what the hell, stay with us for the show. And they loved that as well, and we did a full-blown show with 2 737s and the Falcons. And then we said, what the hell, let's add the SAA Harvards to the ensemble, and we did part of a show with them as well. So we had 5 Silver Falcons, 2 SAA Harvards, and 2 737s.
And with that vast speed difference,
No. The Harvards were going flat out. What you do, it's a very important point. If you're going to display an airliner, particularly a giant airliner, don't for 1 minute think that you should do this at cruise speeds, at 310, 320, 350 knots, because a 747 at 350 knots still looks like a block of flats in motion. It's so big, it's not an aeroplane, it's a place, and it's moving slowly, even at 350 knots. So the big thing is that you've got to keep the speed right down, because the lower the speed, the tighter the radius of turn, and you keep the aeroplane right here in front of the crowd. And in fact, we pioneered this concept. The very first solo show was way before the advent of the formation shows. And Carl and I were together doing the very first show ever. It was thought out very scientifically. It was practiced in the simulator, devised in the simulator, practiced in the simulator, and approached very, very professionally. And the speed was never above 160 knots. So it was tight. It was right in the people's faces. There was just one little problem. We practiced the thing down to 100 foot, 150 foot, and I flew the display, and my boss was actually the commander. He had brought the aeroplane into Durban, and it was the London flight that landed in Joburg. He brought it to Durban, and with Carl, and they waited there for me, and I flew the pitch display at Virginia. I flew across, parked the pits, jumped out of the pits, ran up the stairs, sat down in the left-hand seat of the 747, and I had already heard that they had slapped a 1,000 foot limitation on the show. Van der Veer, do you remember Van der Veer? Van der Veer sent a message saying, not lower than 1,000 foot. And he sent that to the Director of Flight Operations. The Director of Flight Operations said to Doc Malone, my boss, not lower than 500 foot. My boss, and I have never had any reason to ever question him, he said to me, the boss says 50 foot, 500 foot, but we'll knock a naught off that. So now we've gone from 1,000 foot, just like that, 50 foot. And I'm not arguing, particularly not at this late stage. And you know, you should never, ever change the game plan. You shouldn't. That's where you're going to have trouble, because you can open up all sorts of bloody problems. So off we go, and we do the show. And we were never lower than 84 foot. but that's what the flight recorder said on the head, yeah, half a wingspan. But the thing is, at Virginia, you've got these, you've got the runway, and you've got these bushes, and then it falls away to the sea. So it looked terrific with the aeroplanes behind the
shrubs.
Behind the shrubs, but it was still 84 foot down to the down to the water. And we did the show, and my word, was it a show. It was the show of all shows, because never before had any airliner been displayed that way in this country. Maybe at Farnborough, maybe here or maybe there, not even at Oshkosh did I ever see that sort of show. And Carl was doing the hookup with Brian Eminis. So it was really a very, very professional thing. Whoa, boy. So we got back to Johannesburg, and the next thing, my immediate boss, the head of training on 747s, phones me and says that he has just bumped into the Director of Flight Operations. And the Director of Flight Operations is so angry that he's hyperventilating. I don't want to hear this, that the number 2 in the airline is hyperventilating because of me. So he says, you better come out there. Yeah, so I went, I put on a jacket, tie, the whole bloody lot, saw that my shoes were polished, and off I went to Johannesburg. And I was kept waiting outside his office, and then I entered this bloody office, and you've never seen an office like this. It's South African flags and coats of arms and all sorts of bloody things. And he said, sit down. Once again, always. Same office as with the Screaming Skull. I said, thank you, Captain, but I'm happy on my knees. And then he started. He said, you got the instructions. I said, yeah. He said, and you deliberately said something beginning with an F. And a wife, no, sir, no, never. No. My Doc Malone, the one that said cut a knot off, he had taken the first flight out to Europe because he knew something. So I was left to, but anyway, I argued it on the point of changing the game plan. And I said to him, had we done this and this and this, do you know that this would have happened, that would have happened, etc., would have, and at the end of the day, he said, you're right, Scully. You don't change the game plan. Not at that late stage. That's how you're going to have an accident. So that was it. Happy ending.
Scully, you must have had many offers from many other airlines and other display teams around the world to jump ship and move across. What kept you here?
I have, and you know, when you go to Oshkosh, you are so taken up by what you see there that you would give anything just to fly there. You'd love to be at Oshkosh.
We did.
Fly there. We did, yeah. But we weren't stars of the show there. Yeah. But we flew at Oshkosh. Jeff, myself, and the SAF Museum guy. Dave Knudsen, the three of us. But, and you go to England, and you know, it was great flying at Yeovilton, but I was a little bit detached with the 747. We launched from Heathrow, Yeovilton, did the show, back to Heathrow. And you know, you go to Duxford, and you go to Mildenhall, you go to what's the place, the Shuttleworth Collection. Yeah. And I sometimes wish I'd flown there, and I feel that I could have self-actualized to a greater degree, flown different aeroplanes and flown in really air-minded places. But at the end of the day, I love South Africa. I love South Africans. I love the people that I see here. And I love flying for you guys. Yes. I do not want to fly in China. I don't want to fly for people that I don't know. I get such a joy out of, and such pleasure out of having done a show in the harbours, taxiing back along the flight line, and as I taxi, I see one after another person that I know, and I'm happy flying for South Africans within South Africa.
Thank you.
And now you've retired. You've
Sort
flown,
of,
you've
yeah.
flown your last airliner air show. Was that Stellenbosch, or did you fly subsequent?
That was. Stellenbosch was the last airliner show, and no more beautiful place on earth
To do that?
Yeah. Too beautiful for words to fly there. Terrific photo opportunities, you know, those aeroplanes look, that aeroplane looks very, very low, but all optical illusions with the,
Of course, with
the way the ground lies.
No lower than 84 feet.
Yeah.
84 feet.
84 feet, yeah. But Stellenbosch was a hell of a place to fly one's last air show. Really, it's just so beautiful there.
Beautiful picture.
So you've taken early retirement.
Sort of, yeah. But watch the space. You never know. You just never know. I wish I could get an airline job flying just airliners. I mean, displaying airliners. And I made presentations to Red Bull. I said to them that they could pick up two 737-200s cheap. You can pick them up, and that two ship 737 team on the airshow circuit from time to time would look very, very nice. I also said to them that if they wanted a water skiing act, I would oblige with that, and I gave them mathematical proof as to the fact that this could be done with a 747-400. Which it can be, but I don't know why they never showed any interest in it. But I think that would have been a tremendous stunt.
Absolutely. So, you said partially retired. What's your future look like?
I hope to do a little bit of consulting for certain airlines, various airlines. We have a concept called LOSA, line-orientated safety audits. They are fly on the wall, non-jeopardy. I hate being judgmental and talking about people and saying pointing a finger and saying you did this wrong, this wrong, this wrong, this wrong. I would prefer to fly and do check rides in what they call fly on the wall. You sit over there, everything's de-identified. You put a report in to the airline, to the bosses, saying this and this and this and this is going on. They're wasting money here, they are wasting money there, they are not adhering to certain procedures, and here and there they might even be putting the safety of the aeroplane in jeopardy. But you will never ever identify the flight that you did, and you will never identify the person. And I like that type of work. I wouldn't mind doing a little bit of that from time to time with various. It's what I did for Airlink. After Airlink's 2 accidents, I moved in there, and no pilot ever had a finger pointed at him or her. And I was able to help Airlink improve their operation and improve their safety. So I'd like to do a little bit of that.
Okay. And any more aerobatic flight?
Oh yes, certainly. For as long as I can keep going, and as long as I don't present a danger to myself or others, I'm continually measuring myself against other people. And I have found that at my age, coming up 73 any day now, waking up at 3:30 in the morning to go and fly, and doing 4 sectors in a day, and 11-hour duty periods, leaves me very, very fatigued. Fatigue leads to disinterest, it leads to complacency, it leads to minor mistakes. You have to be honest with yourself. You have to look at yourself and say, am I doing the right thing? Am I in the right place at this time of my life? And I think that, and together with the second highest power in the universe, that has been at home for the last 48 years while I have been flying, I figured it was time to pack the airline flying in. For a multitude of reasons. But I don't feel that way with the aerobatic flying. And as long as I can, it's not easy to climb onto the wing of a Harvard. It's quite a big jump up to get onto that wing. But as long as I can keep on doing that, as long as I am not complacent, as long as I'm focused, and as long as I'm enjoying it, I will continue. And I will know when the time has come.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Inspiration.
Scully, with the move to so much automation, this aerobatic flying that you do is never going to be an automated system that's going to do it. But what is our future looking like in terms of the need for continuing to move so many people? I just looked at some numbers. In fact, on the Mango flight this morning, which I bravely took, knowing that you weren't going to be in the cockpit. In 1950, the airlines moved 31 million passengers.
In 1950?
1950. In 1970, they moved 310 million passengers over a 20-year span. And in 2018, they moved 4.3 billion passengers.
Yeah.
Now, we still want to be able to fly our little aeroplanes. We still want to have some space in the sky that these airliners are gobbling up at vast rates, is there room for us as recreational pilots?
It's absolutely true what you say. You know, when I started, when Carl started, when Brian Stableford started, I don't know how many other airline pilots are here, Don Burnett, when we started, we had a total of 14 aeroplane in this, jets in this entire country, 9 727s and 5 737s, servicing the whole of this country. Joburg, Cape Town, Port Elizabeth, East London, Bloemfontein, Kimberley, Klipmanshoop, Uppington, whatever. 14 jet aeroplanes, and we were just getting rid of the Viscounts. We had 3 little puddle jumpers, the little Hawker City 748s. That's what we had. When you look and see what we have today, it's unbelievable. And airspace has become so congested that you actually cannot afford even a 200 or a 300 meter excursion from the path that you're supposed to be on. It is so easy out of a place like London or Frankfurt or Zurich to ring the bells for a noise abatement. If you endeavor to hand fly that aeroplane, you are going to get into trouble. You are going to ring the bells because of a 300 meter excursion. Am I right or am I exaggerating?
Right.
I'm right. And so you have to engage the automation from the word go, so that you're coupled to what we call an inertial reference system with GPS refinement, so that you've got perhaps an 11 meter error. And this thing will take into account, given the speed that you are at and the radius of turn, when to commence the turn to go right over the noise monitoring point and not to the side of it. Everything is done by automation. Everything. And I look at the machines next to me that I'm flying with. And it's not the same as the guys that we flew with. We hand flew the aeroplane. You never had the radar on you monitoring you like the sky just Gestapo. It was it's a different ballgame today. You rely very, very heavily on automation in this day and age. And I see these youngsters next to me, and they plan the most weird and wonderful things on their computers. And I sometimes look down and I say, "You see what you've just planned there?" They say, "Yes, Captain." And I say, "You realize that that line is taking us to a point called oblivion." They don't always know what they're doing. They just lack that good old-fashioned savvy. And aviation has changed. So whatever you're doing now and wherever you're going for your Sunday morning fly-ins and your little trips down this way and that way, continue doing them for as long as you can.
Yeah.
Thank you, Scully. We will do so. I'm about to do that down to Cape Town.
That's the way. He's planned the most fantastic trip in his fly baby. We went over it today, and what an adventure it's going to be.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. We probably have to start drawing a line in the sand here. Questions? Any questions? Will you be happy to take questions?
Yeah, certainly.
Any questions?
As long as I can answer them.
A few years ago, I asked you how many engine failures you experienced in your flying career. 7. How many have you had now? Total engine failures in any airplane?
Total engine failures. Now I'm talking about a dead engine, eh?
Yeah.
All right. I must have had about. I had the personal apprentice. I had the pit special over here. What else did I have?
Supercar.
You have an engine out in the circuits ORT?
Oh, I had, yes. I had that at night in an A300. In an A300, and it was pouring with rain. I was teaching a guy. I had a senior first officer in the right-hand seat, and I had 2 engineers, and I was under supervision. Graham Smith was checking me out as an instructor from the back seat. I was in the front seat. Pouring rain, low cloud base. I had a very, very religious Afrikaans guy at the panel, sitting here, the engineers panel. I was eating a ham sandwich. I must confess. A nice Jewish boy like me, but I was very hungry. Amongst all this adversity, I'm eating a ham sandwich and I'm telling a blasphemous joke. So the next thing, there was a thunderous crash. Wow! And the engine failed. The right-hand engine failed in an Airbus A300, failed catastrophically. I have never got such a fright in my life before. You know, they say you can continue on one engine, etc., 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 etc. Let me tell you, you get the fright of your life.
With a ham sandwich.
With a ham sandwich and a blasphemous joke. And what does the engineer say to me? I don't know whether you all speak Afrikaans or not.
Ja.
But, Kaptein, vat jy dit nie as 'n vingerwys nie? I mean, hell, yeah, I'm supposed to be reading checklists.
And you're eating a ham sandwich and telling
This guy says to
blasphemous
me, don't I take this as a signal from above. So after that, for years and years, those that knew about the story, and I mean, it spread like wildfire. Anytime I wanted to have bacon, like, no. Send the ASS back and get something else.
So how many have you actually had?
What's that?
How many have you had?
Okay, so now
Bacon's
I had
the
that one. I had the pitch special here. I had a pitch special in East London.
Oh, tell us about that. That is amazing.
That one, you know, this pitch special's got what they call a flop tube. And so under negative G, the fuel goes to where the fuel is. I mean, this tube that picks up the fuel goes to wherever the fuel is. So you roll upside down and the fuel flops to the top of the tank and the flop tube follows it. Except that I was going into East London in a 65 knot wind. 65 knots. And never in my life had I experienced such turbulence. It was shaking like hell. And I was down, they always say in the pit special, they say minimum fuel, so much. There has to be a certain amount in the bottom of the tank because of the flop tube. And with this horrendous turbulence, the flop tube and the aeroplane and the fuel all got out of sync with each other, and I had an engine failure. And never mind speeding to high trim for the guy to pick a field, determine the wind direction, no time in the pit special. Pit special just goes downhill like that. And I slammed the nose down, and there was the tiniest little piece of tar. And tiniest little thing. And I shot down this, once again the wind was blowing, 65 knots, same as it saved me over here. And I went shoo, onto the tar, wiggled it on, shot up the road, and there I was, right at the corner, the split in the road at the beginning of the junction. There I am, sitting in a pit special, virtually in the middle of the bloody township. And I thought,
Mayday.
No. I just had to think on my feet. So I loosened up and I stood up and I said, hello, hi everybody. And I had the most wonderful reception. And I was, oh, hello, and there was clapping and this, that, people coming around asking for help, etc. So I had that, and
that is great.
yeah, 3, 4, 5
Missing a few perhaps.
Yeah, but there is always doing a favor in somebody else's aeroplane. This was the Mike Ekalima, the Pitts special that had crashed inside the prison grounds with somebody, and then the Great American Air Circus put it on its back. And when I took off from Margate, I still said to the guys, wish me luck, this aeroplane is jinxed. Next thing, there I am in the township.
Any more questions?
As an instructor, can you remember any outstanding pupils or pupils that sort of stick in your memory?
I certainly can, yeah. Yeah. Now, who are you hinting at?
The name Eckstein or something like that?
I had the Eckstein brothers. Now, the Eckstein brothers were multi-millionaires, and they bought an aeroplane from Commie. Commie said, we can't get an instructor to teach these guys to fly. Would I teach them to fly? They came from Swartruggens. And Swartruggens was Herman Charles Bosman country. I'll try and keep this short. But anyway, what he never told me is that they were both illiterate. They were both illiterate, they were multimillionaires, they were born engineers, they had discovered a way to process andalusite, which is something used in the
factory material.
Smelting of iron, I think. I can't remember. But anyway, so what happened was that they'd grown up in Port Gilesras. The father had been an interpreter in the courts because he could speak a multitude of languages, mainly Sotho and Afrikaans, and he was an interpreter. The two brothers grew up wearing loincloths from sacks and bags. That's how poverty-stricken they were. But yet they made millions and they bought this aeroplane. And the one guy never ever wore shoes. He walked around bare feet. And he could flatten the barbs on barbed wire with his hands. His skin was so thick. And the other guy wore black shoes without socks. And he'd worn them virtually to destruction, that there were cracks in his shoes, and you could see the skin through there. And they took delivery of this aeroplane, and they dressed up for the occasion to meet their instructor. So they arrived there with safari suits. And the one guy barefoot in a safari suit, and the other guy barefoot in his black shoes with cracks. And so I thought, hell, you know. So I taught them how to do a pre-flight. And I realized that something was up when I pulled the dipstick out to show the guy on the Cessna 182, and he took his safari suit and he went. And the other guy, when it was his turn, he took his hanky. And I started teaching him to fly, but I had to teach him a completely different approach. And those days, you could teach out of the boot of your motor car. Yeah. So I used to fly down there with the aeroplane. You never needed an aerial training organization license. You taught the guy, you examined, and I taught these guys to fly. Gee whiskers. And they couldn't even write a check. They used to say, Darcy, there, give me the checkbook, fill in whatever. And they still had a hell of a fight with the bank, because they bought a tractor. And the check bounced, because somehow no one knew how to fill the check in correctly, so the check bounced. And in Afrikaans, you don't say refer to drawer, you say verwys na trekker. They both married school teachers. So this guy says, Muis, called his wife Mouse. Mouse, wat sê dit daar? She says, verwys na trekker. Refer to the and he lost his cool. He said, is hulle dan dom? Are they stupid? How can I speak to the tractor? and they were hell of characters. So I got the one solo, Atti. I sent Atti solo, barefoot, through the sea 182. Damn good pilot, eh? Damn good pilot. Very engineering in his approach. And the other guy, now I send him solo. Ossie. Ossie goes solo in his shoes with the cracks. And I'm sitting under a bloody tree, a marula tree or whatever, and I'm watching him, and the next thing on the downwind leg, this aeroplane starts gyrating. It's going like this, and it's going like that, and it's going like this, and it's going like that, and it's weaving through the sky, and it's doing all sorts of things. And I see a totally unstable approach on the base leg and the downwind, and almost like a crazy flying act. But this is the guy's first solo. And I nearly had an apoplectic fit, and around he went, eventually got the airplane on the ground. And what it turned out was that about a year previously, he was walking through the mine at night, and a baby mamba, even a tiny mamba like this, and they are so fast and they are so bloody accurate. Right through that little piece of exposed flesh, zap, he'd been hit by a mamba. And he had been at death's door for 6 months. And I believe that a mamba is neurotoxic. It affects your nervous system. And on the downwind leg, all of a sudden he chose that time to have a neurotoxic fit. And his throat closed up, and the bloody aeroplane was gyrating all over the sky. You know? So basically it turned out that the sort of antidote was water. So from then on, you always loaded a gallon of water or so when he went
If we went flying.
No.
One more question that I think we have to draw to a close.
You've spoken about your various formation aerobatics. No, not aerobatics. I remember the briefing you did for that flight down in Durban with the two harbors, where you said you must be 500 feet above us, and when we approach, you dive in to get your speed to match the rest of the formation.
Okay.
I do remember that.
Yes.
The other thing, wouldn't it be great to see an Airbus 340 or any four engine with two 737s with the national colours coming out of the jet pump information display?
You know, the guy to that era of pilots have gone now. You know, the Johan Dries, Johnny Woods, Flip Vermeulen, myself, the guys that have sort of slotted into that position. You have Pierre Goos, Nigel Hopkins, Brad Bennett. It's up to them. It's up to them, because they're not going to call us back to go and do this sort of flying. And I think it's very difficult to find that many that have these almost unique skills. But they are out there. There are a couple of SAA guys. Regrettably, I can only think about 2 or 3 of them. But they are there.
And for the airline to find the cash to make the airplanes fly.
Ah, absolutely, yeah. But it's amazing what they can find money for these days.
Look at the
We just
last
need another
flying over
presidential.
Bloemfontein with a 340. Wow.
Okay, I think we have a couple of other announcements. Is that correct?
Yes. Mr. Chairman, hear this.
Thanks, Bruce. And thank you all. The spirit of flying or flight that Scully has spoken about might be difficult to describe, the hiatus of the whole thing, but it is well recognized. And there is a City of London guild called previously the Guild of Air Pilots and Navigators, now called the Honourable Company of Air Pilots. And that august organisation has recognised Scully by the award of the title of Master Air Pilot. And on the 24th of October, next month, he will be presented in the Guildhall at the Trophies and Awards banquet with that significant honour. There's only about 1,700 of those awards been made since the 1927 establishment of the Guild. But very interestingly, the first of those awards was also made to a South African, Captain Kasperuthis. Now, his certificate number is 36, but he is recorded as the first of the Master Air Pilots. So it seems to be fitting that this Master Air Pilot, also a South African, should be recognised now in 2019. And a couple of us at least will be there to witness the famous occasion. So Scully, congratulations on that significant award.
Just tell them how the award came about, please.
I've done a fatal thing. I've
A brief word from
Okay, settle down, chaps. The Royal Air Force Officers Club nominated Scully Levin. Come on, look at the camera. The Royal Air Force Officers Club nominated Scully Levin for this award at Capt. And Rick Peacock Edwards, who was was a South African, as the chairman there said, he accepted it without the committee's approval, and when it was put up to the committee, it was accepted unanimously. And that's never been done before. What a wonderful honour for Scully. And thank you to the wrap-up as well.
Thank you to the Royal Air Force Officers Club. Thank you very much, gentlemen, and thanks to all of you. You guys make it all happen, make us, what we are and what we do, and thank you so much. I feel very warm inside.
Yeah, indeed, you deserve it.
And thank you so much.
It's been an honor, it's been a privilege. It's wonderful to have you back in the auditorium, back where you started this whole thing off. Wonderful that we're able to recognize people like yourself and all that you've done. And this is just a very small token to say thank you. You might be able to recognize, find your way around here. Just when your spare time, when you're starting to feel, what am I going to do? There's no one calling me Captain. Here you go. Take this and enjoy it.
What's an empty logbook?
Thank you very much.
And we have a small gift for Mike, who came all the way from Cape Town to do this interview. Thank you, Mike.
They made it in Cape Town.
I think I can do it than you said.
On your way down.
I can find my way to
When you
Cape
get
Town.
lost.
Attitude adjustment.
And thanks everyone. It's been wonderful to be back here. Lovely to see the auditorium so full and looking so grand and spanking clean and wonderful again. So thank you all, and hopefully this will continue. We'll see you here again regularly.
Thank you. Yay, Mike.